ESM Goh Chok Tong, thank you so much for taking the time to do this with us. We obviously want to talk to you about your new book, The Authorized Biography. But before we get to that, our timing is quite fortuitous. We all know what's happened with the PPCAC last week. So I want to get your sense of that first, to get that out of the way. Now you, in some ways, kicked that off a little bit, late 2017, early 2018, trying to get the process going a little bit faster.
Yes.
Now go back there, tell us why you thought you need to do that. And then now, you also gave them a deadline, end of 2018.
Okay.
Are we back on track?
Well, to go all the way back, I did not understand the importance of managed political succession. So when I was invited to join politics, I was surprised. I had shown no interest in politics, but after a while, working under Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, I understood that many people who were able at that time were not thinking of politics. So he just left it to those who were interested in politics, which meant that the pool was smaller. So he started by getting people to come in. We were known as technocrats. So we were helicoptered in. We learned on the job. So now fast forward to today, I've done the succession after Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. I had passed it on to Lee Hsien Loong. So if you move on to the future, the process, of course, was similar to what we wanted to do in essence. But the people are different, personalities are different, times are different. So this time, it had taken a little longer, according to my own calculation.
Yes.
That's because I thought, since Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong has stated that he would like to step down by the age of 70, the runway for the new team was therefore shorter. So I made a remark earlier this year that it's good if they could come out with their leader or the team, the core team, in 6 to 9 months' time. So they have done so. I'm very happy that they have decided now to pick their leaders. Obviously, the team players are very good. Individual players are very good. But they were a team under Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong. So now they have to be a team under a new leader. The choice is good because I know Mr. Heng Swee Keat very well. I was the chairman of MAS. He was the MD. So he worked with me. During the period of the Lehman Brothers financial crisis, I saw how he worked. And I think he could take crisis and he could manage crisis. Heng Swee Keat also has a lot of experience in ministries, MTI, Permanent Secretary, running the finance ministry. So his strengths are in governing and running the civil service. He hasn't quite been exposed to the mobilization of people, working with the PAP, working in the NTUC, and working with PA. Now, Chan Soon Seng has that. Of course, Soon Seng also has some experience in running ministries, but his strengths so far have been exposed in those mobilization areas. So the two will work very well. They complement one another.
Do you think the choices then were very clearly made to complement each other, knowing what Mr. Heng's strengths are, knowing what Mr. Chan's strengths are, that the team therefore decided, it's good to put these two together? And was that always the plan?
That's not quite so. See, the ministers and the office holders decided on who should be leading the team. So Mr. Heng Swee Keat was chosen to be the leader. And then Mr. Heng, in my view, quite wisely chose Chan Soon Seng to complement himself.
In terms of timing though, now we look back, and since you've spoken quite positively about Mr. Heng, do you think therefore it was his unfortunate stroke in the beginning, which maybe extended the timelines a little bit more than it would have been in the first instance?
I think so. I think without a stroke, they probably could have come to a decision earlier, maybe about 6 to 9 months earlier.
Now, what we hear a lot from the press conference last week and from what Mr. Heng was talking about, and as you mentioned, there's a huge emphasis on teamwork, on building the team. It's a very, very inbuilt PAP approach. And you yourself said also, coming into politics, it's not really much of an individual choice that you had wanted to do in the first instance. Explain that a little bit. Why is it that there's so much emphasis on that? That sometimes it can even be seen as a little bit downplaying individual ambitions.
No, to run the country, you need a whole team. And of course, if there are many people who could form a cabinet and there is a strong man, it's good. That means there's a strong leader. But a strong leader still need a team to get things done. So Mr. Lee Kuan Yew was a strong man, but he needed core members to form, to help him. Goh Keng Swee, Rajaratnam, Othman Wok. They were the core members of his team. But beyond them, we had a larger team. Ong Pang Boon, Toh Chin Chai, Chua Sian Chin, the other ministers. So you do need a team to run the country. No matter how good a man is, your reach cannot be that wide. Your understanding of issues cannot be comprehensive, cannot be total. So you need a team. So in this case, our case especially, we emphasize teamwork. If I may use just a simple analogy, just take a football team. You can have a brilliant striker, but he himself will not be able to win. You need a teamwork. You just look at the World Cup football team, teamwork is paramount. Yeah. It's even more important in governing.
But do you think, therefore, there will ever come a time, using the football analogy, like you just said, where you have a personality within the party who at the front says, I want to be captain one day. Yeah. I know I can be captain and I know I can rally the team around me. Will we get there at some stage with the PAP?
I think so. I think there must come a time when somebody says, I want to be the leader, right? But he cannot command that. He must prove himself to be a leader and people must support him. So in this case, taken some years for people to size up who can be that leader. Of course, that leader is not the strong man you have in mind. I mean, we all come into politics to, as I put it in my own simple way, to do a job, meaning it's our duty to do something. So we do it as a duty, and then of course we must show that we can lead and people will trust us. Then we can rally people around. More importantly, it's not just the party members, it's to be able to gain the trust and confidence of the population.
If now I could just go back a little bit into the book,
yes.
Historical parts of it. During the transition from the first generation to the second generation, Mr. Toh Chin Chai was quite an interesting character at that stage in time, in terms of the role that he played as a pioneer leader. Explain to us a little bit his position at that time, his sentiments on the transition, and how that was managed in the end.
Well, I think Dr. Toh had his reasons, and I understood where he was coming from. He was in his 50s, and many of the colleagues at that time of Toh Chin Chai were also in their early 50s or late 50s. And we had no interest at that point of time or experience in politics. We came in within 2 years or so, we appointed ministers. So from Dr. Toh's perspective, too early, they were too young and were too early. Now, how could we just assume a position in a ministry without having the experience to be able to win elections? So his point of view was valid. Then I began to think deeper into this. I think Mr. Lee Kuan Yew was right from my own experience. Dr. Toh was expecting the party naturally to throw up people who could govern. That was not possible. Having been into the party, having to fight my own election, I realized that the party could not produce such people.
Is it an issue with the party itself, the way it identifies, the way it encourages people to come up? Is that also an issue?
It was an issue because one could argue that unless you are in a party, you should not be standing for election. So there were some sentiments made, but Mr. Lee said, look, we look at the party, but where were the people who could be your backbenchers? I mean, that you could find a few, but to be your ministers, that was difficult to find. So he had to manage those sentiments on the ground, and also the feelings of ministers like Dr. Toh, and of course the need to bring in people like ourselves. But very importantly, we also had to learn how to manage those difficulties, this balance between Dr. Toh's views and Mr. Lee's view to press on with a renewal. So that was the difficult part.
Exactly. So that maybe I'll ask you about that as well, because I think within any political party, it's always useful to have differing views, maybe not dissenting views, but differing views. And at that stage in time, Dr. Toh was one of them. Do you think the party now has that kind of voice that is able to provide the alternative to test assumptions?
No, I would say we must have different views in a party and also dissenting views. Different views, if you're not dissenting, that means we have more or less decided to agree, but we just have different points of view, not quite the same as dissenting views. So party has that. I do know that many of the you know, put it this way, the ministers might know well, not the younger ones, the older ones, like Teo Chee Hian, Tharman, Shanmugam, they do express the views. Sometimes they dissent, but then they discuss, in the end they come to a consensus.
So you are confident that there's enough alternative views, dissenting views, that will provide for a stronger decision at the end of the day once the cabinet, for example, comes to it?
I'm confident as of now, but
Okay.
I'm less sure going to the future.
Why so?
Because if you are unable to attract people from outside the civil service and armed forces
That's something you said before as well.
to come into politics, then you have some kind of civil service or public service thinking. SAF officers, police officers, and civil servants, very able people, but there's a certain kind of a group think.
Yes.
And then over time, if you are attracting only fewer and fewer top civil servants, you end up with many SAF officers or generals. Again, the group think is even narrower.
Okay.
So therefore, I'm just expressing a view way into the future, maybe 20 years from now.
Okay.
You know,
Not
if you have
immediately.
No, not immediately. Immediately, there is diversity. I'm looking forward. 20 years from now, if you end up, which I hope we would not, with that situation, that of course, you begin to worry. Because in the SAF, you're used to a certain way of thinking. You see. And they dissent by a certain way of thinking.
Do you have any sight into the 5G then? Because that is where the new recruitment will have to start. Probably has already started and should be quite well on its way.
It has started, and also I know they are looking for people, and I have also seen a few people who are trying to target that, and it's getting more and more difficult. And the reason is simple. Singapore is doing well, there's no sense of crisis. And there are so many challenges outside, so many opportunities. And social media, and the loss of privacy. So that's the part that deters people from wanting to come into serve. When there's a crisis, I think it's different. When there's no crisis, most of us prefer to pursue our own individual lives. Now let's come back to the book.
Yes. This is actually a good sort of opportunity to get back to there. So a lot of it also has to do with political climate, political styles, and you made it quite clear early on in the book that Mr. Lee Kuan Yew asked you to read The Prince by Machiavelli, and he clearly has his own style. You had your own style, and you said you wanted a gentler, kinder approach. Do you think you succeeded at the end of the day after your time as Prime Minister, injecting this kinder approach?
I think I have caused a change. Mr. Lee's style was appropriate for that part of the history of Singapore. We became independent and no resources, so he had to use a no-nonsense, tough love approach. So kindness was there, but it's a tough love, kindness approach. But by the time we took over, Singapore was growing into adulthood. Not quite an adult yet, but 35 years of independence, situation has changed. So I thought we should therefore move towards a more relaxed and yet a disciplined kind of a society, more relaxed. So I use the term kinder and gentler. Have I succeeded? This is a process. I mean, there's no end to it. You can keep on doing better and better. I would think things have changed. Now we are more participative, more consultative. Philanthropy has gone up. People donate more. And down in the community, there is a very strong network of volunteers helping the vulnerables, the frail, and the aged.
If you were a much younger Goh Chok Tong now, and you were part of the 4G, how would your leadership style change for today's environment?
Well, I think by answering that question, I'll be imposing my view on the 4G leaders. So I think I should let them do it in their own way. Just as I did it in my own way, Mr. Lee allowed me, Lee Kuan Yew allowed me, even though he wanted me to govern in a certain way. So therefore, I will not suggest any view for the 4G leaders.
Well, speaking of which, then let's turn to 1984, where you have basically been chosen by your peers at Mr. Tony Tan's house, which you were, I believe, late for. Yes, you came late.
Right.
You are 1D PM, and people know that you are the presumptive PM, so to speak. Not unlike the situation that we have now. But it's also the year that Mr. Lee Hsien Loong enters politics.
Yes.
Going back to Machiavelli, you said that here's that approach that he has. What's going through your mind now in 1984? Seeing what you need to do, the situation that you're in, and what you need to do going forward.
You see, in '84, Lee Hsien Loong stood for election, and I was the one who spotted him in my work in the SAF. I invited him, he accepted, even though he was going through some, I think, personal difficulties, family situation and so on. He came in. So I was very happy that I was able to recruit, in my view, a candidate with the potential to be a minister and later on as a prime minister. So that went through my mind.
Did it change your mindset knowing that he was a prime minister's son? How did you approach that disjuncture in your own head that you're trying to attract one candidate, but he's also the prime minister's son?
I never worried about that. I never worried about that. See, I just look at who would be good candidates. It could be, by another surname, but it happened to be a Lee. Yes, it's the prime minister's son. But I knew the system very well, that when you came in, there'll be others who will be looking at you, like a hawk, whether you receive any special treatment just because you were the prime minister's son.
Did he voice any misgivings of his own at that beginning, at that stage in time when you were speaking to him?
No, we never discussed that the fact that he was the prime minister's son. In the SAF, we had to be very careful when we recruit top civil servants, children or sons into the SAF for national service, ministers' sons, judges' sons. So you've got to be very careful that they do not receive any special favors. Very important, because if they receive special favors, you can't expect the other national servicemen to support them. So likewise, I think for Lee Hsien Loong, we have our own views in politics.
So that was 1984.
Yeah.
You had quite a long runway to eventually taking over as PM. But an incident that is described in the book is in 1988, National Day rally speech, where explain to us what Mr. Lee said and your own approach and your own feelings at that stage in time, sitting in the audience listening to what he had just said.
Yes, there, I was enjoying his speech until then. And they started comparing, Tony Tan, myself, and so on. So I was wondering what was happening, and then came the bombshell. Well, looking back, when trying to imagine what I was thinking, I believe I sat down, impassively, without showing any feelings whatsoever, listening to him. But of course, going through my mind later on, I mean not immediately, but later on, what was he trying to do? What was his intention? So I describe all this in the book, so I think it's better that I don't say too much. You read the book.
No, you should say a little bit more. Okay, maybe one thing that maybe you didn't describe in the book is that very evening, as you hear the Prime Minister say that, and you go home and you're sitting there thinking, did you have any regrets at all whatsoever that maybe I shouldn't be in this position, maybe I am not meant to be PM? Did you have had
so
that
what's not in the book meant that I did not think too much about that. So had I thought very much, had I lost any sleep, I would have remembered it very well. Then I should have recorded it in the book, because it would be of interest. So after that, I mean, it's my style. What you could not do, there's no point worrying too much. You look forward. But as I said in the book, I was very confident in my relationship with Mr. Lee. I knew he wanted somebody to succeed him. That somebody need not be me. So I thought it was me, but then
exactly.
He did not say it was not me. He said I was not his first choice. But more importantly, is the reaction of the younger leaders. I think almost immediately, maybe within a matter of days, Tony Tan came up to say, there'll be no change. I remain the choice of the second generation leaders. And Lee Hsien Loong also came up almost immediately after Tony Tan to say there'll be no change to support. But more importantly, which I did not put down in the book, this shows that we were not, shall we say, puppets of Lee Kuan Yew. Each one of us had our own thinking.
That's very
that's not captured in the book.
That at the end of the day, I think what you're trying to say is that there was significant enough input and decision making from the generation of leaders who chose you. And ultimately, that was the deciding factor.
Correct. See, so as I said in the book, I thought Mr. Lee was, in a sense, opening up a way, for possible change. Because if all of us were fearful of him, so that was his view, have a rethink, and then they could change, and I would have accepted it.
So
But they came up, which meant that they had thought through the whole process. They decided on me, and they were not going to change.
And they were willing to justify that to Mr. Lee at that point.
They
in
didn't have
time.
to justify, they just had to support me, which they did, you see.
Okay.
And that was also Mr. Lee's purpose. Let us choose. Then you have chosen him, he's not my choice, you have to support him.
Yeah.
So that's the wisdom, as I put it, wisdom of Mr. Lee Kuan Yew in a process, and also in expressing his view. So it's very clear, you have chosen him, you support him. But to be fair to Mr. Lee, even though I was not his choice, he was very supportive of me.
Okay. Now, I mean, the interesting thing then is if you go to 1990 when you eventually do take over and he says it is time, he also mentions staying on the cabinet.
Yes.
What was your immediate sentiment as well? And did you not feel I should have my own say in forming my own first cabinet?
Well, I think my personality is very different. First, as you will know, I think from the book, I did not set out to be in politics. And having been in politics, I did not set out to be the Prime Minister. To be very frank, I thought I could serve by helping the country as a minister. And I had in mind Minister for Finance because I was invited by Ms. Wan Sui Sen. I could do the job. I mean, no difficulty. But being selected by my teammates to be the leader and ending up as Prime Minister, I knew it was a very difficult job. So when Mr. Lee told me after I became PM that he could stay on in the cabinet, I was very happy. Okay. Because we have worked for a long time together up to then, and I knew his style. He was not going to be in cabinet to watch my every decision, and in a sense control me. I think from early events he knew that we did things differently, but we will listen to him, but not to be controlled by him. But having him in cabinet offered me tremendous, shall we say, backup and a presence internationally. As a new PM, I would not be readily recognized overseas. I got to establish my credentials. But Mr. Lee had a presence. So from Singapore, knowing that Mr. Lee was there, it gave tremendous confidence to my dealings with other people. So I welcomed it. I mean, so did it cramp my style? No, I think the ministers we discussed, and when Mr. Lee had a view, he would express the view as a senior minister in cabinet, a man with wisdom, with experience, with insights. So we would listen to him. Did not always follow, but sometimes we would amend our decisions based on his inputs. And at the back of my mind, I knew it's better to have Mr. Lee inside than outside. Because outside, if you want to express a disagreement, tremendous difficulty for the whole cabinet and for the Prime Minister. Inside, as a member, you could express your dissent. We overruled him. He would not be able to say it outside because cabinet decides on the basis of a collective decision. You cannot go outside and say, I disagree with the Prime Minister. Not possible.
Is that the same thinking that you had too within the party? So he gave you that backing internationally, as you say, even in policy. And he also remained sort of Secretary General of the party for about 2 more years after that. Was that also part of his thinking and your acceptance of it?
That's a bit different. When he opted to remain as Secretary General for another term, in fact he didn't say another term, just remain, I understood his thinking. So Singapore was his whole life. So he was very fearful that the next Prime Minister might not have succeeded to carry on Singapore. So even though we have worked for so many years, he knew my strengths. He also knew that I, certain areas which I could improve on. And the main thing is, could I win elections? That's number one. So he would therefore, as he decided, to stay on as Secretary General. So in case, as Prime Minister, I could not carry the ground. I could not carry the ministers along because I was either indecisive or my decisions were wrong. What would you do? As Prime Minister, I could remove him from cabinet. Yes. From cabinet. So supposing there was something hidden in me, and I faked very well as a gentleman, but the moment I became Prime Minister, I behaved like I'm in charge. You see, I want to decide on everything. I started to put in my people, loyalists. He could remove me as Secretary General. So you could say, was there maybe that suggested a lack of total trust. But I think Singapore was at the back of his mind, that he would not allow Singapore to fail. He wanted to watch how I would behave as a Prime Minister. I mean, I accepted it. He was the man who built Singapore, so that's no problem. We are in this, as I put it. Luckily, my philosophy, I was in this for a job, as a duty.
And so therefore, would you say in 1992, after that, at that stage in time, did you feel, and did he feel that you had the support of the people, the party, and within the government?
I always had the support of the party, because I was the organizing secretary. I was chairman of the executive committee for the party, and I was very active on the ground. So I always had a support. But support did not mean that they would support me if Mr. Lee thought I was not able to do the job. But the ground was confident I could do it. So I had a support, and I just did my job. Main thing for me, going my way, was I never had a big ego. So I didn't have to prove myself in anything. Something has got to be done, I would do it, you see. And I was confident I could do it with a team. So the team was very important. I had a very strong team, very strong ministers. And strong ministers working as a team, it was a formidable team, you see.
Let me go and talk a little bit about the opposition.
Okay.
They also figure quite a bit in your book, some interesting insights into your views on them. You've had quite positive things to say of them, whether it's Sylvia Lim, whether it's Lau Tia Kiang, Mr. Chiam, or even Francis Yao and Mr. Tang Yang Hong. You get the sense that it was collegial, there was at least a respect. Was that also part of your overall leadership style, that you felt you wanted to project that kind of image?
I think it's part of me, so that's part of my overall leadership style. I mean, I generally see positives in people. I know that there are negatives in some people. I mean, I'm not blind. You know, I'm not so idealistic that nobody had any fault. I take a balanced view towards people. So even though I know some people have certain negatives, I do not just let the negatives overwhelm the positive side. So in politics, the same thing. I mean, Chiam Si Tong, Goh Chok Tong, I would talk to them, very collegial. But in politics, elections, democracy, by their very definition, mean adversarial.
Contestation, yes.
Yeah, you got to contest. And we try in Singapore to contest in a way that we don't get very personal, we don't get politics into a very ugly, rake the mud kind of a style.
Are you comfortable with the tone now and the position that the opposition is in right now?
Yes, at this stage, yes. I think they do make sharp criticisms. That's not the same as making accusations without facts. So it's better for them to be in Parliament than outside. Outside, no responsibility. In Parliament, they could be challenged by the governing party MPs. So I'm quite comfortable with the tone now.
I mean, within the book also, you provided some insights on thinking within potentially a split within PAP, a one PAP, two PAP. Also, you suggested the party had to think a little bit more as an opposition, or think in opposition style. Explain some of that first, yes. And then do you think why not now? Do you think that's happening now?
Well, to go back, at that time we were totally dominant in Parliament, all the seats for I think 1-2 terms, then later on maybe just a few seats lost. And we knew the sentiments on the ground. People wanted to have different views expressed in Parliament. They would not believe that any view expressed by the PP MP was not within a certain fold. Even though we dissent, but they say, wayang, they put it, this is not real. So they wanted real views from outside. So it's how to deal with that situation, where people's views are reflected in Parliament, not from PAP MPs, because they would not totally believe that we reflect it in a very sincere, genuine way. I mean, they are wrong, we do that, but they do not believe. So the question then was, how to have political stability. It's important to have stability and yet, dissent, different views in Parliament. So we thought, if you do a good job, we'll be in government for a long, long time. So we did discuss, maybe the way forward to have political stability is to split the party into two. then whoever won will still be a good government, there will still be stability. But it's impossible because the team, difficult to get so many good people to go into politics. You just look at our football match now, Singapore versus Thailand. Supposing we had split our national team into two, I think they would have suffered 12-0. but it's not possible. Yeah. So this one they can understand. In governing, people might not have understood. They still need very good teamwork. So if you split it, you right away half the strength of your party.
But the argument could also be made that if you split and it's a genuine split, it could also attract more candidates, more potential people who might want to come into politics that may not have in the first place, or might be thinking joining the opposition. But if there was a genuine alternative to PAP1, maybe you could get more possibilities in terms of candidates.
No, not possible, because even with the PAP in charge, people joining us would not have to suffer risks of not being elected in election. They still would not want to join because it's a different lifestyle. So when you split it into two, you weaken the cabinet right away. And next thing will be, even though you argue a lot, people will still be skeptical. It's PAP1, PAP2. You still would not be able to satisfy the need of people to have what they call genuine voices. And you still would not shut out populist party, radical party at the margins. You still would not shut them out. See? So the way to go forward will be, we welcome, I think, people to go into politics. They can be against us, they have different views, that's all right. What you want will be, people of character, ability, who would speak, I think, with insights. I think we welcome them. They do contests on policies, on who can deliver a better life for Singapore. So we decided that, if that is the approach, better to have a strong PAP, and yet just contest against the others.
So it's your hope that the PAP continues to be a wider party that allows bigger and bigger opportunities for dissenting voices to come in, because that is obviously the next step to go, and it has to go in that direction.
No, PAP has always been a very wide party, as I put it, as wide a tent as you can be. And the PAP today is not the same as PAP of yesterday. We change in accordance with the environment, with the people's educational level, with their expectations, with their exposure to the world. So the PAP remains the same in terms of values. That means integrity, incorruptibility, commitment, dedication, all those values cannot change. In terms of philosophy, also, we cannot change the values. Service to the people first. It's how to serve them, which may change because the situation has changed. But then to gain the trust, never to swagger around. You're a minister, you're such a big man. No, you've got to be humble. Humility is the price value of the PAP philosophy. So those things don't change, but the circumstances have changed, the style, the people, personality have changed. So we got to, and of course, got to have more tolerance for a dissenting voice, inside and outside, which is what they are doing. But how do we overcome that? Before you dissent, we engage you first. So I started that, consultative, participative democracy. So at the ground level, before going to Parliament, I would know the thinking of not just the people, but the intelligent people, different points of view, engage them. And this is what the 4G leaders are doing.
Yes, and that's your sense of Mr. Heng's style as well.
That's his style as well.
If I could now also go back, use the book as another hook on which to talk about current issue. So when you won in Marine Parade for the first time, you won quite comfortably, but there was still a post-mortem. The book mentions a post-mortem as to how you could have done better, or how the people voted in the end. And the issue of race came up. Explain that a little bit. And do you think, if we fast forward to now, if there was still a Marine Parade SMC, the same issues would still play? Is the issue of race something that's still a key consideration in electoral races?
Like many Singaporeans of my generation, who went to a common neighborhood school and later on Raffles, where you have lots of friends from the Malay community, Indian community, I myself was not sensitive to this question of how people would vote, you see, because I had a lot of friends. So the first lesson in this issue in politics was when I sat down in Parliament listening to Mr. Lee Kuan Yew making his first speech after the opening of Parliament, 3-hour-long speech as I tried to describe in the book. Well, he compared Marine Parade with Buona Vista, both more or less similar, in terms of the newness of the public housing estate. Marine Parade had more 5-room flats than Buona Vista, and yet, I had a lower vote than Buona Vista. Both very high votes, 78% and 80% or so. What was the reason? He never gave us the answer. Then we figured it out. I had a higher percentage of a Malay population, about I think 13-14% compared to 2% in Buona Vista. Both of us had a opposition, a Malay candidate. So he figured it out. Then of course, people were voting along racial ground. Fast forward, have we done better? Answer is yes, because at that point of time in 1976, there were still many people who came out from different streams of schools. We had vernacular schools, Chinese, Malay, Tamil, English. You see. So thinking was still very much related in the way to your language. Now in the 2018, people would vote, whatever race, on national issues. It affects them, they vote on those issues. But when it comes to the crunch, my sense is people still tend to be tribal. It's family first, tribe second. I don't think we can run away from that. There are some people who say, no, national issues more important. I go beyond my tribe. But national issues are now common. That's a common denominator, and then you go back to the tribe. I would think it's not so marked now, but when it comes to the crunch, I think we tend to go back to the tribe.
So we've done better.
We have done much better.
But it's an issue which you think then just needs continual mitigating over time. It's not something that will be resolved. It will not be something that disappears. I mean, you see what's happening overseas, race and
I don't
tribe.
think you can resolve it, and neither do we want to eliminate race. We say we're all Singaporeans, that's nationality. But if you're a Chinese Malay, I think India, be proud of your own race. So you've got to work on the ground, mixing, putting people in the same public housing estate or the same floor. You mix national service, you mix in school, you mix so that we understand that we are different racially, but nevertheless, common ground is very important. We are Singaporeans. We have made tremendous progress on that, and should continue to do so.
A bit of your book provides quite rare insight into your own personal circumstances, if I may go into that part of the story, which many Singaporeans may not have known as much of in the past. The circumstances in which you grew up were quite slightly unfortunate. You grew up without a father for quite a while. How do you think that shaped your political thinking, your political positions? And did you have an alternative father figure as you grew up and even into adulthood?
Well, I think when you suffered two deaths within 5 years in the family, my grandfather, then my father, obviously that would shape your life. And my family circumstance was such that I grew up as a very humble person, a very humble background. I've succeeded in life later on, Thank goodness that humility stayed with me. It did not change, partly because of the past. You will not suddenly just change because you have succeeded. So that also shaped my thinking in relations with my friends, in politics. So I have a natural, shall we say, soft spot for people who struggle. So I spend quite a lot of time now trying to help special needs people, raising funds for them, and also helping people within the constituency whom I would regard as disadvantaged students. So that's a natural field which I think came from my own experience in life. But I was very fortunate to have an extended family. So my grandmother was the head of the household, very respected by all of us. Then I was staying with my second uncle within the same household. My grandmother's second uncle, second aunt. So my second uncle would be some kind of a father figure for me. Of course, not the same as a father taking you out and so on, but he was a man in the house.
He played that role?
He didn't play that role, but you just respect him as such. He did play the role in the sense that, like he's a father figure, bring you out, telling you what to do. I mean, no. See, so I just respected him, and his children and me were cousins, so we just grew up in the same family. You can say some kind of a father figure there. I didn't want to put it like a father figure, and it's like uncle to me.
For all the key sort of personal decision points in your life, whether it's going to school, who you marry, whether you go into politics, who did you call upon then? Did you have to call upon anyone who gave you advice?
I would say classmates. Like going to school, my mother, my uncle was not educated. He was a factory operative, biscuit factory operative, good man who worked very hard, supported a large family of his own, plus my side. In no position to advise. So it's your own classmates. Even teachers going to advise you. Teacher will say, okay, which school you want to go to, A, B, C, D, and so on. So it's amongst your own friends you decide what school to go to and how to play the game.
It's good that you had very good friends who gave you good advice then. That must be why you still keep probably quite a close-knit group of friends till this
I don't
day.
know, they gave me good advice or I gave them good advice. Or both. It's actually exchange. A small group of friends. And we are still together. So that's how we grew up.
As we look forward now to Volume 2, if I may start to end this interview, if we look forward to Volume 2, which will look at your time as Prime Minister, I'm quite sure you'll look at a lot of highlights of your time as Prime Minister, but I'd like to talk a little bit more about regrets as well, because I don't think that's sometimes spoken about. But if you look back upon your time, maybe if you don't talk about your time as PM, we don't have to, but personally and in your early years as politics, was there anything you felt that you could have done better?
Oh, of course, of course.
What would that be?
Oh, that's learning the language. I never expected, so I was not good in languages. Supposing I knew I was going to be PM, I would have brushed up earlier on my Chinese and Malay. So I learned, but I learned it as a subject even now. I don't really learn to speak, so I spent a lot of time, when I was PM, learning a language. I mean, that time could have been spent on other things. So that's one regret, but you couldn't solve that, so I could live with that limitation.
In politics, any regrets?
In politics, always there are things you could have done better. So, but what's not in the book, I'm not going to tell you now.
No sneak peek into Volume 2?
No. Volume 2 will be a much more difficult book to write.
Okay.
Because the first volume is about my childhood, about my growth as a person, how I evolved to become a Prime Minister. I mean, that's interesting. Volume 1, also very interestingly, is my interaction with Mr. Lee Kuan Yew. It's fascinating even from my own point of view. Volume 2, I can't go on talking about my interaction with Lee Kuan Yew because by then, I was the Prime Minister. And it has to be more policy weighted. Not just another good story, but policies. And how did I come to certain policies, my reactions, and were there certain interesting anecdotes related to the policies. So I'm thinking through that and how to make it interesting, easy to read, enjoyable, and yet the policy formulation part must come through. But not heavily on the policy side to tell people that this is what we should do, this is how we did things, and so on. I mean, that would not be very readable. So it's a bit more difficult to write.
Hopefully it'll come out soon enough. I'm sure the new generation of leaders will also have to refer to it and will want to refer to it. So good luck to you and Pei as you prepare for your second volume.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.